When a child disappears, everyone usually follows the investigation. But sometimes, the one who should be suffering the most falls under suspicion: the mother. However, proving her guilt turns out to be impossible, even after 25 years. On August 6, 1985, a boy named Timothy Wilsey was born. His family called him simply Tim. By the spring of 1991, he had turned 5 years old. He lived with his mother in the small town of South Amboy, New Jersey, USA, a quiet place, the very streets where everyone knows each other. In late May, on the Memorial Day weekend, Tim went to a carnival with his mother, Michelle Lodzinski. The amusement park was nearby, in the neighboring town of Saraville. May heat, crowds of children, music from the carousels. Originally, Michelle's 14-year-old niece, Jennifer, was supposed to go with them, along with her mother. But the plans changed at the last moment, and the meeting didn't happen. Why exactly is unclear.
It just didn't work out. On May 25, 1991, around 7 in the evening, Michelle and her son arrived at the park. The sun had not yet set. The woman bought tickets for several rides. The boy held her hand. Then they went to a soda machine. A normal moment. The heat, the thirst. Michelle turned away for just a couple of minutes to pay and get the drink. The clinking of coins, the mechanical hum of the machine. When she turned back, Tim was no longer there.
This would be noticed later. The group split up to search. Jennifer and the nanny immediately found a police officer on duty and asked for help. The uniformed officer was patrolling the area. Michelle also spoke with him. She described her son's appearance: a red t-shirt, red shorts with a pattern, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle sneakers. The boy loved that theme. She filed a missing person report, and the officer began to search the park territory, methodically, ride by ride. The festival was immediately stopped. The music fell silent. The area was cordoned off, and a thorough search began. By evening, the search area expanded, first to the nearby woods, then even further. The boy was not found. It was getting dark. There were no surveillance cameras there in those years. No recordings. Only the words of witnesses. The next day, search parties joined the operation. They met the dawn already in the woods.
The state authorities provided a helicopter and a team of divers. They inspected 2 nearby ponds. The water was murky. The bottom was silty. Hundreds of volunteers joined the rescue operation. They combed a huge area along with law enforcement. For several days, they searched the park and its surroundings. Dogs, walkie-talkies, chains of people in orange vests. But there was no result. It was as if the boy had vanished into thin air. Relatives supported Michelle. According to her father and sister, she looked like a grief-stricken mother. She sat quietly, stared at one spot. The woman could not imagine that something like this could happen to her. A few weeks before the tragedy, Michelle had bought her son a graduation outfit for kindergarten. A small jacket,
a bow tie. They were preparing for the celebration, planning to visit Michelle's sister in Florida for the summer holidays. They hadn't bought the tickets yet, but they were already discussing it.
Everything was proceeding as usual. The ordinary life of a young mother. Despite financial difficulties, the woman did not want to live on welfare. Pride, perhaps, or stubbornness. She continued to work, receiving some help from her family. At the same time, the boy's father, a man named George, had no contact with his son at all. No calls, no letters, as if he didn't exist. Michelle met George Wilsey after she dropped out of school. For a time, she lived with her parents on Long Island, then decided to start a family. 17 years old, she was still just a girl. They started dating. The relationship lasted for about 3 years. During this time, the couple moved to New Jersey. There, Michelle became pregnant. In 1985, her firstborn was born. The birth was difficult, but the boy was healthy. When Timothy was born, George was 18 and Michelle was 17. Both were too young for parenthood. They decided to build a family further and moved to the father's home state, Iowa. Cornfields, silence, a different life. But their life together did not work out. 6 months after the move, Michelle returned to New Jersey, where she first lived with her sister and her husband, then rented an apartment. A one-room apartment, 2nd floor. She took the child and completely cut off contact with his father. No explanations, just silence. Michelle never said what exactly George had done, but after the breakup, she did not allow the young man to see his son, not once. The biological father did not pay child support. The woman refused his help. Everything George sent to his son by mail, toys, clothes, Michelle sent back, unopened, as if the boy were an orphan. Those who knew the couple well believed that the reason for the breakup was illicit substances, which caused the young man to physically assault Michelle at least once. Bruises on her arms, a split lip. Neighbors heard shouting.
George himself claimed that she simply missed New Jersey and her family, that she didn't like it in Iowa, so she left. But that didn't explain why the woman refused any help and forbade meetings with her son. It was too drastic. One way or another, in the spring of 1991, 23-year-old Michelle Lodzinski was a single mother to a 5-year-old son. She was the sole provider for herself and her child, desperately trying to make a life for herself, to earn enough to provide for all the necessities for herself and the boy. Rent, groceries, clothes, everything was on her shoulders. To do this, she had to change several jobs, but due to her lack of education, nothing worked out. She was a legal assistant, filing documents, answering calls, then a secretary. Then she worked in several stores, retail, standing at a cash register all day. Sometimes she worked 2 jobs at once, morning at one, evening at another.
Her father sent her money, which significantly helped with the rent. She wouldn't have managed without it. Juggling all this with caring for a small child was not easy. The woman often relied on the help of relatives and friends who looked after the boy while she was at work, a couple of hours here, an evening there. When there was no one to leave her son with, Michelle took him with her. The boy would sit in the back room with a coloring book. She was often late, which damaged her reputation. The management was displeased. She was regularly fired. The cycle repeated. When her sister and brother-in-law, who often helped, moved to Florida in January 1990, it was a blow to her. She was practically left without support. The last straw was gone. Then Michelle sent her son to her brother in Minnesota for 2 months to save money for the boys' school preparations, notebooks, pencils, a backpack. She needed a break.
Many who knew Michelle well described her as a devoted mother who dedicated all her free time to her son and tried to give him everything he needed. They went hiking together, baked cookies, prepared for school at home, learned letters and numbers. She seemed like a normal, caring mother. However, after the boy's disappearance, opponents of this view also emerged. It turned out that Tim was a problem in Michelle's relationships with men. None of them wanted to be burdened with someone else's child and broke up with her because of it, one after another. Michelle was in despair. She was in her early 20s. She wanted more than just to work and raise her son. She made an effort to sort out her personal life and gradually began to see her son as a burden. Slowly, unconsciously perhaps. One of her ex-boyfriends described Michelle as an inapt mother who had not yet grown up and behaved more like Tim's older sister. According to him, the woman was inattentive to the child.
She could get carried away with a conversation and forget where the boy was. Once, Tim wandered into a neighbor's yard where he was badly bitten by a dog, a Rottweiler. The boy received 72 stitches on his face. The scars remained forever. Although the neighbor had warned Michelle beforehand to make sure the child did not enter his property, she had nodded then, but had not watched him. One of her friends said that Tim was very afraid of his mother's last boyfriend, a man named Fred Bruno. The boy would hide when he came over. He really did make an unpleasant impression, a loud voice, a hard stare. But Michelle did not take her son's fear seriously. She said he was making it up. The friend even believed that it was Fred who was responsible for the child's disappearance. Too convenient a coincidence. The first obvious suspect was Tim's biological father. It was logical.
The man had been rejected by his ex, forbidden from seeing his son, so a motive to kidnap the boy had appeared, to take him for himself. The father's house was thoroughly searched, the basement, the attic, the garage, but no traces of the child's presence were found. The man successfully passed a polygraph test and had a solid alibi. He was at work. Witnesses confirmed it. Michelle's last boyfriend, that same Fred Bruno, was also checked, but he too was quickly ruled out as a suspect. He also had an alibi, also a polygraph. When the FBI joined the search for Tim, the agents immediately suspected that Michelle Ledzinski was not quite who she claimed to be. Her behavior seemed strange, too calm, as if the woman was not very concerned about what was happening. She was experiencing difficulties with finances and men, constant stress.
For young, single mothers, constant stress and difficulties sometimes become a reason for thoughts of getting rid of the child as the main source of problems. Some give their children to relatives, some relinquish their parental rights, and some mothers even kill their children. Statistics know such cases. Michelle quickly became the main suspect in the boy's disappearance or even murder. The authorities wanted to understand what she had done with him, where she had put the body. Just a few days after the disappearance, The woman was subjected to a lie detector test. She failed the test. The needles jumped. A week later, a second test was conducted, but the result was the same. Another failure. According to the expert who supervised the process, the young mother showed very strong emotional swings and hardly made eye contact. Her gaze was to the side, to the floor, anywhere but at the person she was talking to. It seemed she was more concerned about her own well-being than the child.
Several clear signs of deception were identified: uneven breathing, trembling hands, and later, agents found out that Michelle had been lying to close friends, claiming that she had actually passed the test successfully. Why? All this attracted intense public attention. Relatives and neighbors noticed that the mother did not show much emotion and was not suffering because of her child's disappearance. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat. During these days, Michelle appeared at a press conference to announce her son's disappearance and to attract concerned citizens to the search. Cameras, microphones, flashes. Many noticed that the woman looked too calm, spoke without emotion, as if reading from a script, monotonously, without pauses. This fact alone became a reason for even greater suspicion. A wave of criticism fell upon her. Neighbors whispered. The press wrote headlines.
The loved ones who supported the young woman claimed that she was suffering greatly and was just behaving reservedly in public because of her character. Not everyone knows how to show grief. The most suspicious fact was the changes in Michelle's testimony regarding the story of the child's disappearance. Within a month of the disappearance, the young mother added a large number of small details to her story, which appeared gradually with each new conversation with law enforcement. First one version, then a slightly different one, then another. Then her behavior stumped the investigation as the story of her time in the park began to transform beyond recognition. If at first it was about simple inattentiveness, she turned away, the child was gone. Then new characters began to appear. It all escalated to a story of a kidnapping involving armed people. First 2 men, then a man and a woman. The details kept changing. Law enforcement officers didn't know what to believe at all. The interrogation records contradicted each other. Now Michelle was sure that her son was being held somewhere, alive. She stated that this certainty did not come from nowhere, but after a call from an unknown person to her home number. At night, a man's voice, unfamiliar. The unknown man claimed that the child would be returned within a month if she did not raise a panic. That's why she was showing such composure. It seemed logical. It was not possible to confirm this information. No call records were kept. But why make all this up? What was the point? Michelle's suspicious behavior made detectives take a closer look at the young mother. Given the length of time since the disappearance, it was believed that the boy would no longer be found alive. Days passed. Weeks. The banks provided investigators with information when they tried to find out if Michelle had received large money transfers for the alleged sale of her son, the black market for adoptions. However, no large transactions were found. Her financial situation had not changed either. The same income, the same expenses. Then all her property was subjected to searches: her house, her car, warrants, dogs. They decided that the mother herself had killed the boy.
But no bloodstains were found anywhere. Not on the walls, not on the floor, not in the trunk. They didn't stop there. Forensic experts used luminol to detect wiped-off blood in Michelle's house and car, a chemical light in the dark. But they didn't find that either. It was clean. However, the authorities managed to sow a seed of doubt in the truthfulness of the young mother's words in everyone, including her loved ones, because of her constant lying. Trust was gone. One of her friends agreed to have his car bugged, a microphone under the seat. He was supposed to lure Michelle and try to get a confession out of her, leading questions, long pauses, but it didn't work.
In the subsequent 11 months, no compromising recordings or statements were obtained, but the inconsistent stories continued. She kept changing the details. 3 lengthy interrogations of the woman were conducted, for hours. But, except for the contradictory information, Michelle gave no new leads. She did not understand why the detectives were so focused on her. She remained confident that her son was alive and would be returned. They promised a month, then 2, then a year. In October 1992, there was a breakthrough. A school teacher was walking in the area of an industrial complex along the Raritan River and found a sneaker with a picture of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. 1. Dirty. It was known that Tim loved these characters very much. Posters on the walls. Toys. The passerby had seen reports about the boy's disappearance and knew that shortly before he vanished, Michelle had bought him similar shoes. His memory worked. The man decided that all this could be connected, so he contacted law enforcement so that the authorities could compare the information. When the sneaker was first shown to Michelle, she initially stated that it was not the shoe she had bought for her child, categorically. And she provided a whole list of distinguishing features, a different shade, different laces. But then she began to doubt. A pause, a glance to the side, and she stated that perhaps the sneaker belonged to her son. Maybe. All this looked suspicious. The police continued to dig and found out that Michelle Ludzinski had previously worked at this industrial complex near which the shoe was found when Tim went missing. A coincidence? Another compromising fact was that she had not told the detectives about this. She kept silent. At the same time, her colleagues stated that after the boy's disappearance, the young woman's behavior changed. She became quieter, more distant. Now, during lunch breaks, she often took walks along the water near her work, without explaining why. Alone, just standing and looking at the river. After the discovery of the sneaker, ominous rumors began to spread, and FBI agents decided to inspect the area more closely. After searching the coastline, they found a second sneaker here, identical to the first, a pair, and also scraps of clothing, similar in description to the outfit Tim was wearing when he disappeared. Red fabric, faded. About 200 meters from these items, they found something even more disturbing. In a backwater with stagnant water, they found the skeletal remains of a small person, a child. The child's bones and several items ended up in the hands of law enforcement on April 23, 1993. The forensic scientists had scraps of clothing and toys similar to those Tim loved, a plastic turtle figurine. The most valuable item was a human skull, small, a child's.
It was believed that all this belonged to Michelle's missing son. Notably, the mother again showed no emotional reaction when she was told about this. The detective watched her face. Nothing. Not a tear. Not a sigh. 25 meters from the remains, they found a pillowcase and a patterned blanket, which became another curious piece of evidence, a floral print. Fibers and hairs were collected from its surface and examined under a microscope. But they did not match Michelle's hair, or Tim's hair, or anyone else from the woman's family. They belonged to a stranger. The child's body was examined thoroughly. Dental records confirmed that the skull belonged to the missing boy. The shape of the teeth, a filling on a molar. Due to the absence of many skeletal bones, as well as the complete decomposition of soft tissues, the medical examiner was never able to determine the cause of the child's death. Drowning? Trauma? Strangulation? Unknown.
By this time, Michelle had already started a new life. She had moved to a neighboring state, as if nothing had happened. A new apartment, a new job. They were unable to prove her involvement in the alleged murder at that time. The case went cold. The files were archived. However, the suspicious oddities associated with this woman did not end there. In September 1994, at the age of 26, Michelle was once again in the spotlight. She was shown on the national news, all channels. The woman told a story of how 2 federal agents had kidnapped her near her home in broad daylight. Threatening her with a weapon, they pushed her into a car and drove her to Detroit, where they later released her, just dropped her off on the street. She made her own way back, by bus. Michelle even contacted the FBI, stating that 2 men had called her several times, threatening her, pretending to be agents. They demanded her cooperation and a confession to Tim's murder. Pressure. But Michelle continued to deny her guilt, so she was later kidnapped to intimidate her. This story resounded loudly throughout the whole country. The public was shocked. Talk shows, newspapers. People were divided into 2 camps. Some were outraged and demanded that the authorities leave the woman alone. Enough of the mockery. Others supported the agent's decision to improvise in order to obtain a confession from the woman who had likely killed her son, all for the sake of truth. Investigating the circumstances of the supposed kidnapping, the FBI came to the conclusion that it was a lie. The check proved it. Later, Michelle confessed that she had invented the story about the kidnapping and had in fact traveled to Detroit herself by bus, bought a ticket, went, returned. But she could not explain why she had done it, just because. People following the events believed that she simply wanted to become famous and gain pity for herself, using the death of her own child. Naturally, this caused a new wave of negativity. The sympathy evaporated. Having returned from Detroit, she even hung a note on her door with the message, "See you soon. This is not the end," in printed letters. It was believed that the main suspect also hung this sign herself to corroborate the kidnapping story.
The threats continue, you see. In May of 1995, the investigation was ongoing, but Michelle was already on trial for something else. The young woman was sentenced to 6 months of house arrest and 3 years of probation for staging the kidnapping, an ankle bracelet. In 1997, Michelle pleaded guilty to another crime, stealing a computer from a former employer which she wanted to give to her boyfriend, another boyfriend. At that time, Michelle was pregnant, so her sentence was lenient. The court took it into account. The woman was sentenced to 4 months of house arrest and another 3 years of probation, another bracelet.
Timothy's case was still unsolved. On the contrary, it had reached a dead end. Even the FBI agents could do nothing. The technology of the 90s did not allow for a more detailed analysis of the evidence to obtain physical proof against the deceased's biological mother. DNA testing existed, but was imperfect. But Tim was not forgotten. The investigation only moved off dead center in June of 2011, when the county prosecutor's office resumed its work. A new team of detectives was assembled, young, ambitious. They were tasked with analyzing the existing materials using innovative methods, new equipment, new approaches. It was believed that the most significant piece of evidence that could link Michelle and the boy's death was a blanket with a pattern. After all, there was, of course, no blanket with them at the amusement park. The weather was hot that day, May, and it made no sense to drag it along to the rides. None of the witnesses at the park saw it.
Not a single mention. If a stranger had kidnapped the boy, he would not have been able to use this item. How would a kidnapper have the child's blanket from home? It was assumed that the mother had intentionally brought it with her from home, wrapped the body. According to the detectives, people who had interacted with the suspect before the child's murder must have seen the blanket. They began re-engaging with her relatives and friends. Calls, visits. Among her old colleagues, witnesses were found who claimed they had seen Michelle use it. Yes, I remember the little flowers. In the early 2000s, Michelle Lajinsky was living in Minnesota with a new husband and their son together. Another attempt at a family. In 2003, this marriage fell apart. Another divorce. Michelle moved to Florida when she was pregnant with her 3rd child. Alone again. Here she gave birth, bought a house, settled in with her 2 children, and worked as a paralegal at a law firm.
The same duties as 20 years ago. She kept photographs of her firstborn who had died, honored his memory, and wanted his brothers to know about Tim's existence, a frame on the shelf. The investigation into his death continued, quietly, but it continued. One of the detectives leading the investigation in 2011 took the blanket, found on the shore near the child's remains, and went to see Michelle's niece, Jennifer, who had been at the amusement park on the day of the boy's disappearance. During this period, they had grown very distant from each other and did not communicate. Years of silence. After looking at the item and listening to the investigators' theories, Jennifer immediately understood that the object belonged to Michelle. She had seen it in the woman's house on multiple occasions before Tim's disappearance. I remember. Jennifer used to cover the boy with this blanket when she babysat him. He loved it.
2 other women who helped look after Timothy also identified the blanket, the exact same one. Finally, the circle was complete. It became obvious that the blanket could not have ended up next to the body by chance. This meant the mother brought it with the child to the industrial complex grounds, thinking the body would never be found there. A quiet place, no one around.
The woman was arrested 20 years after the disappearance, handcuffs, a warrant, and she was charged with the murder of her son. It was presumed that the prosecution had enough grounds to consider her guilty of first-degree murder, premeditated. The hearings attracted many concerned people. Opinions were divided. It was a difficult trial, held from March to May of 2016. The courtroom was full. Cameras were not allowed. The only new evidence was the testimony of several witnesses who confirmed that the blanket found near the boy belonged to his mother.
The niece testified at the trial against her aunt, stating that she had seen this blanket in her house. She was now convinced of Michelle Ledzinski's guilt, without a doubt. A number of witnesses testified in court, stating that they had never once seen this blanket in Michelle's house. Never. It was also not in any of the numerous photographs of her with the boy in her home. All the pictures were checked. Fibers and hairs were once again collected from this item and sent for analysis. A modern laboratory. They were analyzed much more thoroughly than the microscopic tests of 1991, DNA. But they all also confirmed that none of the hairs belonged to either Michelle or Tim. Someone else's hair. From where? Besides this item, the prosecution relied on the young mother's strange behavior, her contradictory statements, and her calmness when discussing anything related to the deceased child seemed to point to her involvement.
The defense attorney reasonably argued to the jury that this was not enough to consider the defendant a murderer. Circumstantial. Only circumstantial. The place where the remains were discovered was located only hundreds of meters from the building where Michelle Ledzinski worked during that period. Close. It was an inconspicuous area where almost no one walked. An industrial zone. Michelle knew this and could have deliberately chosen this place to hide the body there. There is logic to it. The prosecutor was confident that there was too much circumstantial evidence, and it all led to the boy's mother, a web. However, the woman's lawyer stated that from May 25, 1991 to April of 1993, when the body was found, several major storms had passed through. Heavy rains. Independent experts confirmed that the Raritan River, in whose backwater the skull and belongings were found, had overflown its banks. Twice.
The river itself was located not so far from the amusement park where Tim disappeared, so the water could have carried the evidence to this place. The current. This was also indirectly confirmed by the fact that many fragments of the boy's skeleton were never found. Ribs, arm bones, carried away. The prosecution's tactics changed somewhat compared to the investigation's version from 1991 to 1993. The prosecution insisted that Tim did not disappear at the amusement park. He was never there at all. A new version. The jury was offered a new scenario. In reality, Michelle went there alone, having already gotten rid of her son.
Moreover, the child looked upset the day before he disappeared, and Michelle was angry. She was shouting at him. Someone else claimed to have seen a little boy matching the description at the park, a red t-shirt. However, there were very many children at the carnival, so it was easy to mistake Tim for another boy. All of this sounded very debatable, unreliable. Michelle harmed herself the most, as she gave such contradictory testimonies during the initial investigation that the jurors could not believe her. Trust was lost. She even had several versions of the story about buying a soda the very moment the child disappeared, according to her. Initially, she claimed that she simply turned away to pay for the purchase and grabbed the drink, a second, and when she turned back, the boy was already gone. Later, the story changed significantly, even radically. She told of a kidnapper, one man, then of 2 kidnappers whom she saw in the crowd leading her child away by the hand.
Then she began to claim altogether that a man and a woman took the boy after they had managed to ride one of the attractions, a carousel, a Ferris wheel. At first, she herself was threatened with murder, a knife to her throat. Later, there were stories with threats of a knife. A friend named Ellie, whom Tim met. They supposedly ran off somewhere together, but the boy did not return. Ellie disappeared too. All of this was so contradictory that Michelle's lie was obvious and at the same time inexplicable if she was not involved in the boy's death. Why lie like that? However, the lawyer believed that these fabrications did not explain her involvement in the death. A disorder. That was the explanation. Nevertheless, the defense attorney had an explanation for all these oddities. An independent psychiatric evaluation showed that Michelle Leginsky suffered from dissociative identity disorder. Documented. All of this could have led to the emergence of complex and contradictory stories.
Fantasies, false memories. According to the lawyer, it began and manifested particularly vividly in 1991, immediately after her son's disappearance. The trauma triggered the mechanism. This is precisely what explained the strangeness in her behavior. It was a reaction to very severe stress and shock. The psyche defends itself. The evaluation confirmed the disorder. A diagnosis in hand. There was other evidence as well. At times, the young woman behaved like a stalker. Obsessiveness. For example, an ex-boyfriend stated that she called him over 1,000 times in a single week. 1,000 calls. Before he went to court. He only managed to calm her down by threatening to get a restraining order, a legal document. Thus, the lawyer attributed Michelle's lies to her illness, including the story about the kidnapping. Not guilt, but a symptom.
The prosecution at the trial insisted that Michelle killed her son because she gave birth to him out of wedlock at a very young age and experienced constant financial and emotional difficulties. The child was indeed growing up during a very difficult period in the woman's life. Pressure from all sides. Michelle did not communicate with the child's father, did not allow her son to communicate with him, and did not accept any help. Complete isolation. She had no one to leave her son with. Because of him, she could not sort out her personal life. Relationships with men were not working out. A vicious circle. All of this only worsened the situation. It was accumulating. Even members of the Leginsky family were divided at the hearings. While Michelle's father and sister believed she was a good mother, her brother and niece Jennifer stated that she was likely involved in the boy's murder. Family against family. The defense chose a controversial tactic.
The main witness in court was a man named Damien Dowdell, a resident of Arizona, who told a story from his cellmate, Bernard McShane. According to the man, he once heard a confession from him about how the cellmate had killed a child in an amusement park near Atlanta. A drunken conversation. Questions immediately arose regarding the location where this happened. It did not match. Atlanta is in Georgia, not New Jersey.
But Damien attributed all this to inaccuracies in the killer's own retelling and his own memories. Time had passed. The details had faded. Damien spent a total of 18 years in prison for 3 armed bank robberies, a criminal past. After his release in March of 2015, he initiated his own investigation as he found similarities between his cellmate's story and the case of Tim Wilsey, playing private detective. But his controversial testimony was not enough to raise doubts among the jurors. Furthermore, he was considered an unreliable witness.
The motive? Fame? Money? In May of 2016, Michelle was found guilty of murdering her son, a crime committed 25 years before the trial. The verdict? She was sentenced to 30 years in prison. The courtroom froze. After the verdict was delivered, the jurors spoke with journalists, reporting that their opinions had been divided. Not all agreed that the woman was a murderer. The vote was not unanimous. They were convinced by the mother's own strange testimonies. It seemed she was clearly hiding something. But why would she do that if the woman was innocent? The logic is simple. Immediately after this, Michelle's defense team got back to work with renewed vigor. They tried to secure her acquittal, particularly on the grounds that there was no physical evidence confirming the woman's guilt in the child's death. No blood, no DNA. Numerous checks and tests were conducted, but nowhere did they find the boy's blood or any traces that Michelle had killed him and hidden the body. Nothing material. After the appeal was denied, the lawyer went to the Supreme Court, the next instance. Now he focused on the fact that it was not known at all how Tim died. The cause of death was not established. Maybe he simply ran away from the park himself and died a natural death, an accident. No one killed him. Furthermore, according to him, numerous standards for charging and convicting for murder had been violated, procedural violations. The Chief Justice recused himself, a conflict of interest. And the remaining judges reached a stalemate, leaving the guilty verdict in place. The votes were split. After this, the defense attorney did not rest, returning to the Supreme Court once again. Persistent. He persuaded them to apply a rarely used rule allowing for a rehearing with a different judge. Following the new trial, a slight majority acquitted her. Free. By this time, Michelle Lajinsky had spent more than 7 years behind bars. 7 years of her life. In 2023, the woman returned to her sons in Florida. Home. Family. The Supreme Court rejected the prosecution's arguments about motive. The prosecution claimed that such cases are not uncommon. If a young single mother faces financial and social problems, she may see the only way out in killing her child. But this was not enough to sentence a woman to 30 years in prison. Too weak. Curiously, after her release, Michelle's brother, who had spoken against her at the hearings, stated that the jury was right to convict his sister of murder.
"I believe she is guilty." He insisted that the lawyer had not corrected a great injustice, but had actually taken it away from little Tim. Justice did not prevail.
In any case, under state law, Michelle can no longer be prosecuted in this case, even if new evidence against her emerges in the future. Double jeopardy is prohibited. The boy's biological father, George, still believes that Michelle is somehow connected to their son's death. Did she do it herself, or does she know who did it? The question remains. Many members of Michelle's family also consider her guilty because of her strange behavior, the contradictions in her testimony during interrogations, and also because of the staged kidnapping by the FBI agents. They are baffled as to why Michelle spent so much time and effort on all this nonsense, which would have been better spent on finding the truth in her son's case. Energy wasted on nothing. Officially, the murder case of Tim Wilsey is unsolved, but many believe that the mother simply got away with it.